Those of you in the audience that knew Susan know that this is true, and those of you in the audience that did not know her, I have an article here that I would like to read to you. I will excerpt it because it was out on the table and will be back out there later, or if you care to read the complete article. But there's some items in here that I think speak to what a fine person Susan was. This article appeared Monday, January 2nd, 1961, in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution by Mr. Ernest Rogers, who I believe was an entertainment columnist at the time, something along those lines. Bear with me if my reading skills are up to par. The Christmas party of the Tanner Memorial Hospital personnel, patrons, and directors in Carrollton, Georgia was over, and we had gone to the home of Mr. and Mrs. J.W. Warren, he's the administrator of the hospital, for an informal visit. At the door, we had been greeted by young Jim Warren, a 2.5-year-old charmer. He had been allowed to stay up past his usual bedtime because it was the holiday season and his customary routine had been interrupted anyway. Among others gathered in the Warren home were Mr. and Mrs. Eaton Chalkley. Mr. Chalkley is a prominent Carrollton businessman with financial interests in other parts of the country, notably Los Angeles. Mrs. Chalkley, well, perhaps the following dialogue may be revealing. Mr. Rogers, Mr. Warren had said by way of introduction, "I would like for you to know Mrs. Eaton Chalkley." After expressing my pleasure in meeting Mrs. Chalkley, I could not resist the obvious play. "Haven't I seen you somewhere before?" I inquired. "It's possible," she replied. "In Atlanta?" "Could be. I've been there." "In Hollywood?" I continued. "Could be," she replied. "I've been there too." "Haven't I seen you in motion pictures?" I persisted. "Very likely," she responded. "I've made a few." "Aren't you more generally known as Susan Hayward?" I asked. "Perhaps," she responded, "but in Carrollton, I'm more generally known as Mrs. Eaton Chalkley." And that's the way it is. When Susan Hayward, the Oscar-winning motion picture star, returns to Carrollton from making movies in Hollywood and elsewhere, she slips gracefully into her niche as Mrs. Eaton Chalkley and becomes an unostentatious member of the community in which she has chosen to spend her non-professional periods with her husband. While this bit of byplay was in progress, young Jim Warren had stood patiently by, and at its conclusion was given a big hug by Miss Chalkley, or Miss Hayward if you prefer, and in return paid her one of the nicest compliments I ever heard. He said in tones of sheerest rapture, "You smell just like ice cream." From that time on, young Jim had the situation under control. When Mr. Chalkley set fire to a fine and fragrant cigar, the youngster sprang into action. "Please put that thing out," he implored. It seems young Jim can't abide the aroma of cigars, regardless of the identity of the smoker or how high the quality of the smokables may be. When requested to do something that didn't meet his fancy, such as going to bed, he had a pat answer. Later, he would say, with finality. Things were not the same after young Jim did go to bed, but everyone agreed he had given an excellent performance. And why not? Didn't he have in his supporting cast one of the most beautiful and most talented actresses in the history of motion pictures? I don't think Mr. Rogers would object if I add a little sentence to the end of that. One of the finest and most caring people I've ever known. Thank you for having me. Thank you for all being here and remembering Susan.
Thank you very much, Jim. We appreciate it. And Dan, I wonder if you would like to say a few words to some of your recollections.
Like my brother, this is a very emotional experience for us. And I'm really happy that I'm able to be here and also see some of our old friends and some of Susan's old friends as well. Nowadays, people are all too eager to rush forward and tell tales on celebrities, mostly in the negative. And it is an honor for me to be here and talk about someone who I love very much and meant a great deal to me, but who means a lot to the public in terms of being a celebrity. And I think it's important that you know some things about her that were never printed in any article were not in any of her biographies. And probably a lot of people even that did know her wouldn't know. I didn't start out as a fan of Susan's. Like Jim, I was a child when Susan came into my life. My memories of her are those of a child, which are at times very vivid, at other times very watery. I was first deeply attached to her husband, who I knew as Unky. I think I was way in my teens before I finally figured out he was not a blood uncle of mine. But before he was hers, he was my Unky. He was a wonderfully warm man, big and booming, who would scoop me up in his arms and swing me around the yard, take me on trips with him to his farm, to his office, and to do errands. He taught me to ride horses with him, sing Irish songs, and love him dearly. It became known to me, I think I might have been around age 7 or 8, that he was to marry a lady from far away, a movie star. Well, this meant very little to me at that age, and in the 50s, I was not a big movie fan other than Disney. She was going to take my Unky from me. That was my only thought, that things were going to change between us. It wasn't long after I met her, that I saw that that was not going to happen, that it would only add to my relationship, and it wasn't long before I loved her too. She included me into their life, and soon it was Unky and Susan, as if it was one name. The times I spent with them make up my fondest memories. As my brother has already mentioned, we spent a lot of time at her home, some formal occasions, some on the houseboat on her lake, cookouts at the playhouse, and other times at our own home, where my mother would make her favorite meal of steak and salad. Christmases were extremely special for me. We would have a midnight mass at the Catholic Church, which was a legacy of Unky's. And then we would go to their house for a late supper and eggnog. That was when I would receive my traditional Christmas gift from them, which would be a savings bond. I never knew Susan, the movie star. I knew a woman, a wife, and a mother who loved to sit alone by her lake and fish. A woman who on her honeymoon bought presents for me and sent them to me from Europe. A woman who with Unky would buy a special gold and pearl cross and remember to take it with them to see the Pope and have it blessed and bring it back to me upon her return. This was a woman who, upon hearing that I'd been invited to my first formal at age 15, had my mother bring me out to the house where she would try one dress of hers after another on me. And then upon deciding on one, to my horror, made me undress so that she could fit it on me herself. She would crawl around on the floor with pins in her mouth fitting this dress on me. This was not a movie star to me. This was a woman, a person who cared. A woman who took time to come to my 10th birthday party as a surprise for me and my guests, laden with gifts, and took the time to sit with about 20 girls, some of you, maybe some of those girls' parents who were present at that party, where she signed autographs and stayed quite a bit of time. I think there's a picture on the table of that. This was a woman who, upon the death of my mother when I was 16, which was very sudden, took the time, who would come to our home and sit for hours to comfort me and to hold my brother. She was there for our father in his unalterable grief, who sat with us at her funeral and helped us through some of the longest hours and days of my life. who opened her home to our relatives from out of town, who took me shopping on several occasions afterwards to mother me and make an attempt to keep me active and not to feel so lost and lonely. A woman who sat with my father upon the loss of her own husband, my beloved Unky, in her own grief, wanting no one but my father, with my brother and I in her bedroom, which adjoined, all of us grieving over this man that we loved. Our father, Bill Warren, who I hope can come on another night, would like to have been here because he has some special memories of Susan, not only as a friend, but because of the great contribution she made to Town Memorial Hospital. She wanted to be part of this community, she loved this community, and she gave countless hours in public appearances to raise money for the hospital in its numerous expansion projects. I think in this way she did become a part of the community, and those of us who love Carrollton and Carroll County owe her a great deal. As I stated previously, you won't find these things in a biography. Although she was a movie star, she was not a great publicity seeker, at least in my memory. When we would be out together shopping, she would shun people who were trying to fawn over her. She just wanted to be my friend that day. They're private memories of mine. I wanted to share them with you because I want you to get a sense of her as a person, as a caring and wonderful mother. And the only thing that I knew to do in my loss was to keep her alive, was to name one of my daughters after her. And I just wanted to share that with you and to say I loved you, Susan, and thank you all for loving her with me.
Thank you very much, Ann, for sharing those thoughts with us, and also to you, Jim. Thank you for coming and for bringing with so many interesting articles and photographs. And you may have noticed out there that there was one shoe out there on the table, and that shoe was, since we don't have captions and identifiers on all of our items there, told that shoe was worn by Susan Hayward in one of her pictures. Please help me on that now. Back Street. And so there's another shoe that goes with that set, and there's another set, I guess, too, as well. So those were given to Ann, and among a lot of other things. So we thank you for bringing that in. And please, if you have a chance this evening, take a look at some of those items that a lot of different people brought with tonight for your enjoyment.